Go ahead.
Okay, so
and Liad, one thing you need to know is that she's very good at multitasking.
all right, we are live, and that's good to know about the multitasking. So I'm very excited today because joining me, not one, not two, but three very special guests. In fact, this is the first for me having this many people on at once, so I'm excited. So we have Liad, Mudrik, Lucia, Melloni, and Michael Pitts. So I wonder if you guys could just say a little bit about who you are and what you do to get us started. And I guess we agreed that Lucia would go first, right?
Whatever, yeah, I can definitely go first. So who I am, I'm Lucia Melloni. I'm a trained clinical psychologist turned into a neuroscientist, a curious person about consciousness, the mind, working in Frankfurt at the Max Planck for Empirical Aesthetics and NYU. And that's more or less it. And I have the pleasure to work with these two guys, like here who, like it's just amazing to be, with them. So yeah. And I'm excited to, have you interviewing us about this.
No, thank you. I'm excited too.
And I'm Liad Mudrik, coming from Tel Aviv University. I've been fascinated with the question of consciousness. I know it's a cliche, but in my case, it's true. More or less since the first day I set foot at the university and started talking about the mind-body problem and consciousness and brain and how it comes about and so on and so forth. Because I've been interested in the question both from the philosophical and the neuroscientific point of view, I did 2 PhDs, one in cognitive neuroscience and the other in philosophy, and then continued to a postdoc with Christoph Koch, which was a great honor and pleasure. And now working in my lab in Tel Aviv, mostly on the neural correlates of consciousness and testing theories of consciousness, unconscious versus conscious processing, how the two differ from one another, and also consciousness role in voluntary action. So this entire free will question, which is a small question that people need to solve.
A tiny one, yeah. Totally.
So, and as Lucia said, also have the honor and the pleasure of working with both of them in the Cogitate Consortium.
I know you guys are all so friendly. I love it.
Didn't I tell you that she's good at multitasking? Have you interviewed somebody who has 2 PhDs? Just for the record, right?
Yeah. I think I did actually. I think Claudia Passos has that too.
And I think Adina Roskis is the same. She also
right. Yeah, I know. I've always wanted to.
You should interview her too because she's great.
Yeah, I've emailed her, but Dad, I would love to speak with her. So that's awesome. So I don't want to start asking about it yet, but
wait, Mike.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Oh yeah, I can introduce myself. I'm Michael Pitts. I'm a professor at Reed College, and I only have one PhD. And my background's in psychology and neuroscience, and I study mostly perception and attention and how those are related intimately with consciousness. So I've done some work on bistable perception and binocular rivalry, and then also inattentional blindness, masking, all these ways we can manipulate perceptual awareness and study the neural correlates of those differences when we perceive something versus when we don't. And as Lucia and Liad mentioned, I'm just thrilled to be working with both of them, two of the smartest people I've ever had a chance to work with, and it's just been a pleasure so far.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of adversarialness in the collaboration so far.
Not
between the two of us.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. Well, so that's interesting. So we have a mix of people that have done philosophy, psychology, neuroscience. All of you do some background a little bit in both, so that's awesome. That's exactly the sort of people we need, since this is not a problem that really can be approached from any one field, or at least that's my assessment of it. So before we get into the nitty gritty here, I wonder if I could ask you guys about sort of your personal views about consciousness. Do you have them? Do you try to suspend them? So yeah, I'm sort of curious. You said you had a postdoc with Christoph. So does that mean you sort of are leaning towards IIT, or you favor it, or I'm not looking for biases. I'm just curious, sort of what your feelings are as a person in the field.
So I can start because you refer to Christoph. So I'm even before this project. So now that we are a part of this project, then we are forced to be neutral. But even before that, I was not affiliated with any theory. In fact, the reason I got into Christoph's lab as a postdoc was because I published a paper that kind of went against IIT and one of its predictions. So I'm at a stage, I feel that I'm at a relatively kind of young stage in my understanding of the question. So at this point, I'm being truly honest when I say I just don't know. I'm still at the stage of trying to understand the question to the best of my extent. I don't have any theory of my own. And I feel that the theories in the field are now also at the stage where we need to clarify them and understand exactly what they mean. And we need to find the right tests for them in order to have substantial evidence that would allow us to weigh in favor of one theory or another. So as far as I'm concerned, maybe it's just because I'm not mature enough and I need to study this more and understand it better. But even before this project, I felt like there is a lot of clarification and conceptual work and empirical work that needs to be done before we can reach a decision. So at this point, I'm truly agnostic. I just don't know. I hope that our project might help us a little bit more to kind of understand and weigh in.
Right.
But that's my own, at least.
Right. I mean, well, we want to talk about that in a little bit, but how much of a little bit or how big of a step, so I saw Dawood say something like, well, if we could do it in 100 years, our project aims to try to reduce it to like 50. I was like, really, by half? That's kind of, that's not a little step. But who knows? That would be wonderful. I mean, that's a great goal. I'm not knocking it. But so that's interesting. What about anybody else on the fence?
Do you want to go next, Mike?
Sure. Yeah, I would say in terms of the theories that are out there, I'm with Liad. I'm not committed to any given theory. I tend to dig in and read a lot about a certain theory and get really excited about it, for several months, and then figure out it doesn't explain everything, and then move on to another theory. So in terms of theories, I think that would be the case. I guess my only sort of personal, I wouldn't call it a bias, but view about consciousness is I think it's intimately linked with attention somehow. I don't know exactly how, but I'm really interested in this relationship between attention and consciousness. And if I had to put money on it, I would say there has to be some close relationship in any final theory. But I don't think we're there yet. And as Liad mentioned, I think the fun is we have these theories that make predictions that we can formulate tests. We can also do just data-driven, come up with the cleanest manipulation you can, and the only thing that's varying is your conscious perception or your conscious state, and then try to go in both directions to attack the problem. So
right.
Yeah, I think that would summarize my view.
Oh, so I guess I'm the last one. I come from a different probably part, which so I started my PhD really truly convinced by Francisco Varela and Wolf Singer. So we worked on synchrony for many years. I wrote papers on that, and my aim at that point was theories need to explain certain phenomena. So I kind of tried to deconstruct okay, if a theory is a theory, it should explain this, and that, and that's why I kind of convinced me at some point that consciousness may have something to do with synchrony until I realized that it just didn't.
Right.
And at that point it was also interesting to realize wow, there's some magic in all of these hypotheses. When you put them at the limit, you realize actually it doesn't really quite explain. and so this was my first kind of discontent with my own, it was not even Stan or Julie or what have you. It was just my own limit. It's I'm just bullshitting in some sense. I don't really know.
We call that philosophizing around here. I'm just kidding. I know I'm a self-hating philosopher. I actually think
don't be. Philosophy is so important and definitely not bullshit. So
I'm kidding.
But it's exactly because of that, because you realize philosophy pushes you to the limit, and then you realize look, I actually don't have the answer.
That is the important thing. I agree with you about philosophy.
You see, and actually, this is exactly the interaction that to me was wow, okay, so actually I don't have it. That's the other. Do other people have it? And I start looking around, and at that point, also Jan and a student, in my lab at the time, we started looking at how those theories, including our own work, had been, created, and we realized look, the data seem a little bit noisy. You know, the theories are not complete. You know, so what are we really explaining? You know, and at that point, it became actually quite disillusioned, I have to tell you. You know, so it felt, you know, so what are we doing? And I actually stopped doing research on consciousness at that point. You know, there's just no. And then eventually, one thing that made me come back through this project is that I realized that even though people started acknowledging the problem on the methods, the confidence on the theories paradoxically increased. Which to me felt like, I mean, no, there's something just absolutely odd here. Like, we all know that the data are somehow in some way noisy. And yet, at the same time, we believe that we have more evidence for the theory. Like, to me, it just didn't match.
Right. Yeah, there's a real disconnect between like the intro section and then like the results section.
You see what I mean? You know, it really, at some point, it just felt like, you know, a little bit psychotic in my own mind. It's like, I mean, what's wrong here? And it felt that projects such as this one are probably what is needed for the field to kind of like shaken up in terms of, okay, you know what, you really need to specify your, you know, assumption, first of all. We need to acknowledge what we explain, what we don't. And we also need to acknowledge that the data that we have are not particularly clean. You know, so in that sense, I kind of like, I agree with David that, you know, so part of actually coming to a theory, hopefully, is to, you know, make your assumptions, any assumption, on the, you know, put them on the table, and also clean up the methods, right? So I hope that these mechanisms will enable that. You know, will we?
It's interesting because and maybe this is, I don't know, but like in the consciousness field, you have these labs that are, not all of them, but a lot of them are led by like a well-known person who's like investigating a certain approach or something like that. You guys' research has sort of shown that they, a lot of confirmatory evidence, but not as much disconfirmatory evidence. Yeah. But if you sort of step back for a second, when I was reading this contrast stuff, and I saw your presentation at ASSC, which is great, and all that stuff, but I started thinking, yeah, it's weird because what you would predict sort of like beforehand might be that, well, you would have a lab that would do what you guys have been talking about, sort of be neutral and test different theories and check data, but not be advocating for a theory. So I started thinking, gee, it is kind of weird, actually. Like in other areas, if you read a typical paper on attention, yeah, they may advocate for a theory, but they're also, you know, checking a bunch of other stuff as well. You know, there's 3 other things that this could be compatible with, or we haven't ruled out. And you don't really get that sense in the work here. So I wonder if, is that because of the topic, or is that just because of the way the field came up? Or do you have any, what do you guys think? Am I wrong about that? Maybe, I don't know. So what do you guys think about that?
So I think there is, I would maybe try to differentiate between 2 approaches to what you're talking about. So you're referring to the contrast database, which is work by Tayeron, who basically took 412 experiments that, you know, referred to 4 leading theories in the field and tried to see how they study, how these theories were empirically studied. And as you say, what we find is that if you only look at papers that ended up supporting GNW, you find mostly frontal activations, while if you look at papers that ended up supporting recurrent processing, for example, you find mostly posterior activation. So you can interpret this finding in one of 2 ways. One is what you just said, which is basically we have 2 camps and each one is kind of finding evidence in line with their own theory. But I would actually want to present you with another interpretation, which is you have those labs who find, you know, look at their theory and find supporting, but also sometimes challenging evidence. But you also have a field, which I would claim, before I spoke about my own maturity, let me refer to the maturity of the field. Okay. So I think what happens is that many people, they find a specific finding. They don't start up, this is another thing that Itai very nicely showed, is that you have relatively few papers that set out in advance to test the theories. So most of them, they look for some contrast for, you know, seen versus unseen. They find a potential NCC. If that NCC is frontal, then they say, well, this supports GNW. If it's posterior, they would say, well, this supports recurrent processing, and so on and so forth, also for the other theories. So basically what we show here is that the field is now very focused on finding, now in, you know, in the last decade, finding NCCs and then post hoc interpreting those NCCs in light of the theories. While what we would like to have more and more are studies that in advance say, this is the prediction of theory A, this is the prediction of theory B, let's test them and see what we find. And what Itai showed was that only 7% of the studies that he looked into indeed contrasted predictions of at least 2 theories.
7%.
Which is, it's a very low number.
Yeah, exactly.
So we need more of those. And I think
it's almost, I mean, it's sorry to cut you off, but do you think it's, I mean, I just was thinking when you were saying, it's almost like there's a second phase that we're entering, where the first phase was like, take us seriously, like we can study this, we can do it, we can get results. But now we're like, we got too many results. We have to see like which ones we should take seriously.
Yeah, and I think it's also a transition from the search for the NCC to a stage where we have different theories. They took these NCCs and they put out, they suggested very interesting accounts, but now the time has come to test these accounts and test them a priori and not only kind of post hoc. So I think this is the new stage where our field kind of enters.
It's like a more pessimistic.
I'm always optimistic. I'm happy to take the optimistic stand.
Okay. So let's hear from the pessimist.
No, but I think that you have just for the sake of like push us to think about what we are in here, right? Because say that there's a third interpretation of what like Liad said, which is like, okay, either you think that people don't, you start with your bias and therefore you find what you set out to find, which I think that it always happen and will always keep happening no matter what we do. I think this is what we humans do, right? The second one, which is this part that like a lot of the people interpret in postdoc, that it also is not necessarily per se from my point of view negative. It just reflects the fact that we are, we have 30 years of data, so we don't really know, and we have some theories there, and we need to then say, okay, so does this finding fit with what, right? And so I think this is what we have been doing in the past 20 years, right? Right? And now the third, and so you could say like the third alternative is now to start like doing more adversarial. You could say yes, fantastic, that could actually be a possibility if the theories were sufficiently spelled out. And I think that, like one of the things that we will find out, through these, exercises is that the theories, and this I come back to what I was trying to tell you before in my journey, is that we are not really clear onto what we explain and what is the limit of our explanation, right? And the fourth is, which is probably part of my pessimism, is we need to acknowledge that our methods are not good enough, and that with the experiments that we have been running have not been sensitive enough.
Right.
So, we have tons of confound. So from my point of view, I somehow refuse to interpret something that I feel is noise. So I'm just gonna put it absolutely out there. So, so long, I think that my research, for instance, has shown in many ways, that, I mean, you can interpret certain signatures of one way or another, and then you realize that you just try to distilling, what happens, and, some of them remain, some of them don't.
Right.
So the more we do those kind of things in an agnostic way, I also think that we're going to learn a lot.
So you're talking about no report paradigms? Is that what you're?
No, I'm talking about distilling, like the report, the attention, the memory, like all of the things that surround these things that may actually have nothing to do with consciousness. But of course, we don't have subjects in a vacuum, right? They are doing something. They are pushing buttons. They are looking at one thing or another, right? So long we don't do that, I feel that we're going to also get corrupted data, so there's not much to interpret at the same time.
But you're not so pessimistic that you're saying that 30 years of data is like unsalvageable, corruptedly or something. I can't say what I'm thinking, but what I mean, like it's salvage it.
I think that you can salvage it in the following sense. You can say like, okay, so whatever journey you had until here, you were able to come up with this theory, right? So then, and now I refuse to test the theories on the predictions that they made based on the past data or on the things that they already know, right? Because that, from my point of view, is like a post-diction, right? So what I want now is like, okay, so now let me take your theory, and if your theory it has any predictive power, it should be able to predict new data and new observations and new things that you haven't seen.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So that if we so now I think that we can actually say that whatever, like even if the data were wrong, or good or what have you, if the theory is sufficiently spelled out, we should be able to go on with this next part and then learn something.
Yeah, and I don't think there are very many theories, if any at all, actually, which are spelled out in that amount of detail.
Exactly.
Even IIT, which is like the most mathematically precise in some sense, although in another sense it's not,
Yeah.
because phi can be specified willy-nilly in all sorts of ways, and
Yeah.
how do you measure it and approximate it? So there's tons of stuff there, but even there, it's not clear 100%. Like theoretically, the limit, you're right, but like how we do it here isn't. And global workspace theory is another one. I think that people feel like they understand it, but then when you actually try to understand it, they don't. It's like
exactly.
It falls
exactly.
apart.
Exactly. So, but isn't these exercises are so healthy because of that. It really, like brings to awareness, like, oh, we think that we understand each other, but actually we don't.
Right. We're all relying on metaphors, and they they snap if too much weight gets put on them.
Exactly. So
yeah. So I mean, this is some people might be really pessimistic, and I don't think any of us here are. Although I wonder how not pessimistic we are. By the way, before I move to this next question, Michael, did you want to say something about any of that?
I mean, I guess quickly to follow up on what Lucia was saying, I do think there's a value moving ahead with sort of the agnostic. Let's try to control for as many things as we can. Let's try to do the most careful manipulations and contrast and worry about the pre-NCCs, we call it, or the prerequisites before you're conscious of something, what happens after, what allows you to report. I think we can learn a lot by doing that. And I think it was around, what was it, Lucia, 2010, 11. It's sort of like, it was almost the zeitgeist, the spirit of the time thing, where a bunch of different labs were thinking along the same lines. And I remember distinctly reading Lucia's paper with her student Jan back in 2011. I think it was preprint or something, and immediately emailing Lucia and Jan saying, I was thinking the same thing. We have some studies that go along exactly with what you're saying. We need to get together. We need to organize a symposium. And then there was, I think, a simultaneous paper that same year, 2012, saying basically the same thing. So a bunch of labs were thinking about this. And I mean, back to your point, Richard, about do we need to sort of look back in the first 20 years and say, we don't trust any of that data? No, I think they were very useful to kind of help us develop these paradigms, to get these theories up and running, to make predictions. But then I think you can use that as a jumping off point. I agree with Lucia. We don't want to take what the theories were predicting 10, 15 years ago and allow them to adapt and allow them to be refined based on new information. And I think realizing that maybe we're not using the most controlled paradigms, our studies aren't powered enough, our neural measurements are rough in a lot of cases. So realizing that can really inform the direction we go forward. So I think in terms of the search for the NCC, yeah, we might be at this transition point where we can now do more theory testing and sort of different type of science instead of just kind of gathering information, running every experiment we can. But I think at the same time, we can still kind of hang on. I don't know if I'm alone out of this group, but I like the approach that Christoph Koch and Francis Crick proposed back in the early 90s. Like, let's simplify the problem. Consciousness is very difficult to study. Why don't we just start simple and try to come up like the minimal, the minimally sufficient set of neural events for any one percept, and that can then inform all sorts of things. It can be signatures we can look for in the clinic to help diagnose consciousness. It can be sort of a guidepost for animal model studies, and when you can get into the human brain in the rare situations to say, where should we look? Well, let's look at these neural signatures. When are they occurring? About where in the brain? And that kind of guide you where to look. And then they can also, link up with what we already know from all other areas of cognitive neuroscience. So we have a bunch of developing areas in memory, in language, in attention, and perception. So if you find sort of a rough neural correlate somewhere, then that might inform how different networks are interacting to lead to that subjective experience. So yeah. Sorry, I said that was going to be quick, but got going there.
No, I mean, I'm thinking about what you're saying. It was good, but I mean, because one of the, like, for example, I agree with everything, most of everything, that we're saying here. In fact, I'm agnostic myself, largely speaking, and I write a lot of papers defending the higher order approach to consciousness, mostly because I feel like no one understands it, and that it should be developed to the way we were just saying, it should be developed in enough detail that you could show that it was wrong. And so I think that, there's a kind of prediction there that people haven't really noticed, this misrepresentation prediction. People think it's absurd, so that's a perfectly great thing to test. The more it conflicts with intuitive judgments, the better. That didn't falsify it, but I feel like people haven't really been thinking about. So for example, let me step back. So this project that we're all involved in different ways. You guys are running this, are involved with the the IIT and global workspace theory. I'm involved with the first order, high order stuff. And just that way of separating stuff to me already is a problem, because there isn't like a theory called higher order theory, which is pitted against first order theory. It's rather that there's a whole bunch of theories which are first order, and IIT and global workspace theory are first order theories. So I really feel like if you're going to do this right, you should always have one. You should be aware of that distinction and always have one representative on either side. And I know they tried with the who. And it didn't work out for why, and we don't need to worry about all that stuff if we don't have to worry about it. But it just does seem to me that it's an important part of the way to test the theories, because, for example, this could come out where you guys find something, but it could be like a correlate of an unconscious content, or not because IIT is a theory of content, not a theory of consciousness, or whatever. And there's no really way to test the real division in the landscape, as I would see things, between the approaches which say, okay, we need some sort of higher order monitoring, representation or something, and those that deny it. So I wonder if what you guys, so I would be a little bit pessimistic about the project for those reasons. It just divides up the landscape in the wrong way, so that what you guys aren't really testing, according to me, is not really like a theory of consciousness, but some predictions about where things associated with the theory are going to be found in the brain. But it's not per se consciousness, because you haven't ruled out the other side. Anyway, so I just wonder if maybe I am being too myopic in my thinking here, or if you guys think that you could correct me, because I would like to be less pessimistic. I want to join the optimist on the top screen.
let me give this is actually we'll go back to what Meg was saying, right? So if you perhaps a better way to think about this is in a framework, right? And you can do pairwise comparisons, or you can compare 3 or 4, you can go with any level of combinatorics, right? The way in which I think about this problem is you do a combinatorics of 2, and then you share the data, and then you share the data, and then the other guys that we're testing the IIT and predictive coding and all plus all of the other labs that I hope will do this outside any of these mechanisms. We'll share the data, so then we can actually really compare across a large set of data. Because again, from my point of view, reliability, I'm probably obsessed about with noise and signal, but from my point of view, what really will be relevant is to understand this in the large numbers, right? So if we do this in many different comparisons with many different contrasts, with many different stimuli, hopefully somebody will do something not in vision, but tactile, or audition, it would be great. Then you could actually look, okay, what happens, when I look at multiple data sets, multiple forms of consciousness, and so on and so forth, right? So I shared your pessimism in the sense of, how much can we do with a pairwise comparison, right? And, you can do a lot, but not everything, right?
Well, it's not about my worry. I guess what I was being pessimistic about is whether it would narrow down theories of consciousness.
Because they narrow down.
Say what? Sorry.
Could you explain in which way it would narrow down?
Well, just what the sort of project is aiming to do, and reduce the number of viable theories in some sense, or challenge them in some way.
So I think. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that I think the three of us, when we describe this project to others, we kind of emphasize, it has a very big title, right? Arbitrating between theories of consciousness and so on and so forth. But we all, I think, share a level of modesty. And to be honest, I would be very surprised if within 3 years either IIT or GNW would step down and would exclude itself from the discussion about consciousness. I don't think that would be the end result.
No,
and I'm not sure it should be the end result with respect to whatever we find, it will require more work.
Right.
So my ambition in this is not to kill one of the theories or to exclude them or to narrow down. My ambition is twofold. First, to force the theories, and that I think picks up on what Lucia said before, to clarify exactly what their predictions are, and also to kind of sometimes force them to make predictions about things they didn't relate to before this project. So I think what happened to us was in some cases where we said, so what would you predict in that scenario? Although you didn't say anything about that in the past, now let's think about, perception maintenance or duration and so on and so forth. So that, I think that's one ambition. It's just that this project and others would help us understand the theories better, and also understand, again, I'm going back and to this concept of maturity, to understand which theory is mature enough to give us clear predictions that we can test, and which theory still needs more development. So that is one goal. And the other goal is to at least force the theories to revise some of their claims. Right. So at the end of the day, I think it would be very plausible if IIT would have to say, well, you know what? Here I was wrong. It doesn't mean that the entire theory was wrong, but at least in this and that point, I need to think again. And the same for GNW. They might still hold on to the idea of global network and global workspace and so on and so forth, but they would say, but you know what? Here, there is a result that I was not expecting, and I have to explain why that happens. And I can always explain it post-hoc and say, in retrospect, this experiment was bad, but we all, because the process is transparent, we know that when we started, you did think that the experiment is good enough to test your theory. So I think the combination of open science and the entire process being public, and the kind of magnitude of the data, this would kind of... Yeah.
Just to write what you just said right there is like, I guess that's what I'm wondering about is, does it test the theory, or does it test because it seems like and I don't know, by the way, I don't know if I couldn't find it or if I'm inept at the internet, but I couldn't find the pre-registration, preprint.
That's terrible that you didn't find it. I'm happy to send
the science paper, and I found the contrast.
In the science paper, there is a link to the pre-registration. When you click on it, you're supposed to get it. But I'm happy to send it. I wanted to look at
it. So anyway, my bad. I'm sorry. So I should have.
It's public, and whoever wants it is more than welcome to get it. We're looking forward to comments.
I'll put a link to it here, but because the two experiments that you have that design, one involves the video game, right? That's a attention task or something like that. But the other one involves just looking at a screen or something and seeing some stuff, and there's nothing really going on at all, right? So there you are. There's the link. Awesome. Thank you. I like that. I don't know why I didn't see that. I had the science anyway, so that's my fault. I think
never mind. Now you have it.
Maybe because I read it from the link on the Cogitate website, and it was a PDF, but maybe it wasn't like a. Anyway, so it's
here now, so everyone can take it.
Yeah, exactly. But so anyway, so there, what you're looking at is so as far as I understand the goal of that part of that experiment, the IIT crowd, Julio, says you should see some sustained activity, maybe in the back part of the brain, back here somewhere, the hot zone. And the global workspace theory says, no, you should see some burst of activity that fades away until something else shows up. So does that test the theories of consciousness, or does that test some background assumption that they have about how the brain works? I mean, so to me, it's not clear that tests the theory of consciousness for reasons I was saying before. So I wonder why you guys think, or if you think that this does test some claim that they've made about that follows from the theory as a theory of consciousness, as opposed to a theory of brain function or something.
Yeah, I can try to jump in and explain a little bit more about experiment one. So
okay,
the two main things we're manipulating are the task. So one assumption I think both theories make is that it doesn't matter if you're in the lab looking at stimuli flashing on the screen and you have to make judgments about those stimuli every single trial. If you're looking straight ahead, there's nothing else on the screen, and we show you a face, you're going to consciously perceive the face and the tasky relevant conditions in our experiment. So you're looking for a particular letter or a symbol, and then we show you a face, you're going to see that face. And that's something that the theories haven't really tested, at least extensively yet, especially global workspace theory. What happens when you don't have to report even to yourself what you're perceiving? So it's really saying, okay, we know we're going to find what Stan and colleagues have been finding for the last 20 plus years, when we have targets, when we have do a discrimination on these stimuli that are showing up. But we don't really know in this really basic case how that's going to translate over to the case of tasky relevant stimuli that you perceive, but you don't have to do anything about. And then the other key manipulation is how long you subjectively experience a stimulus. So if I present something for half a second, versus 5 seconds, I think we all would assume that your conscious experience would differ in terms of its duration. How long do you have an experience? Yes, it's difficult to, if you go for a really long stimulus, maybe you see it, then you start thinking about something else, your mind wandering, and there's complications there. But we had that in mind in this design. So we have these 3 different stimulus durations, and then that allows us to test key things that really differ between the theories. Like you mentioned, Richard, global workspace theory thinks there's this ignition and then sort of a fading out until there's some update in the workspace, something else, like the stimulus goes away. Now what you're perceiving is different. Where IIT has this identity relationship. So as long as you're subjectively experiencing something, the neural correlates, according to IIT, should persist. So I think those are the 2. It seems like a really simple experiment when you look at the method. It's just we're showing faces and objects and letters and symbols, and we're changing the task and the duration.
So what exactly are the subjects doing? Like, what is the task that they have to do?
They're looking for
Can I say something before you go into the weeds of the experiment? Because I want you to kind of like think also, Richard, from a different point of view, right? Because I take the at the core of your question, I think it's something really important, which is like, okay, are we trying to understand consciousness through these adversarial collaborations, right? And I think that's a really important question, like, well taken. And I can tell you, and I think this is what this experiment is trying to do beautifully in the following sense, right? So if you think about an experience, that experience is there, or we usually obsess about what brings something into awareness. Like, why am I aware now of you or Liad or Mike? But also one thing that, and at least personally, I was always fascinated by is the fact that I can look at you and you don't disappear.
Yeah.
How come that I look at you and you don't disappear? And I can give you actually an even more interesting fact, which is that I close my eyes all the time because I blink, and you don't disappear either. So in my conscious, there's no input, because I close my eyes, and yet you're still there. So how does that magic happen, right? So now when you think about that, then you realize that any theory, being global neural workspace, higher order theory, first order theory, whatever theory, needs to actually explain this phenomenon. Right. So what this experiment actually tries to do is to say, like, okay, so, and that's why, in fact, for instance, we had to ask Stan, what would you predict? Because, every time Stan, does an experiment, is about, masking attentional blink, but never does an experiment that tells me, like, okay, so how come that, you did not disappear?
Right.
Which is the flip side, right? So now, actually, interestingly enough, it happened that for that particular phenomenon, they made contradictory predictions, right? And then became handy, right? But so what? And the reason why I'm going through this lengthy explanation is because just to give you a sense of, it tries to understand consciousness in some sense that we have not understood before, even though it seems trivial and mundane.
Right.
Yet we haven't done it,
I think that trivialness is actually pretty cool. That's the part of the experiment.
Exactly. So I want you to appreciate that before Mike explain it, because then you say 500 milliseconds, and then we end up like the nitty gritty, and then people kind of forget the why.
Right.
You know, and what matters is the why we do it. You know, and this is
Right.
why we do it.
And I, yes, that's the philosopher.
Yeah.
But actually, if you think about it philosophically, also when you think about the other, so experiment 2 is one where we try to get this contrast of seen versus unseen, which is what the field has been doing for a lot of time.
Right.
When you think about it philosophically or more deeply, there's also some confusion there, right? Because let's say that I present you with a face, and because of our video game, in some trials you won't see the face, and in other trials you will see the face. And we say this is a conscious trial and an unconscious trial. But that's not really the case, right? Because when you don't see the face, you still see the entire display and you see the computer and you have a very vivid conscious experience. But that's from that experience, the face is missing.
Yeah, just as content.
Exactly, but it's not really seen versus unseen in the way people typically think about it. So in a way, this type of what I think is nice about this project is that the two experiments really kind of complement each other. So one experiment gives you the seen versus unseen contrast that we are used to in a somewhat different way than people have been doing, because now we have very strong stimuli presented for a long time on the screen. And the other experiment, which we should say follows the work by Farouki and Manley and Leon Dowell's lab, where they try to do similar things, we take these stimuli and we just show them and ask what happens when you are conscious. And we also, a critical aspect of this is the manipulation of task. So what information can we find in your brain when you are clearly conscious of a stimulus, but you're not doing anything with it in terms of task and cognitive processing and so on and so forth. You're always cognitively processing it, but not in a task-related manner.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. So I don't know how to ask or even if what I'm going to ask is even coherent, but it's never stopped me before. So
I have a hunch it will be coherent.
Well, no, I'm not sure, because the global workspace theory, like what you're saying is, it's not clear to me that what you guys are saying right now is that you are testing a prediction of Stan's or of the global workspace theory of consciousness. And it's, what would be the difference, obviously, would be that, so for example, Bernie Bars has a different version of global workspace theory. And I think you could possibly have a different version that's closely related to like something that Jesse Prince's view, that connects attention more centrally as the gateway into working memory, which is basically a global workspace broadcasting sort of story, but from the lower level, like it broadcasts from the sensory cortex to working memory, as opposed to the way that Stan thinks of it. The frontal cortex is the broadcaster, not the thing being broadcasted to. So, I mean, all right. So is that the global workspace theory of consciousness? No. Or is it Stan's view about how content in the brain, guided by his understanding of the theory, his implementation of it, but it seems like wrong, I think, to say that it's a prediction of global workspace theory that is being tested.
I think you're making
do you think that's fair? Or?
Yeah, I think you're making an excellent point, because people are talking about how the field is fractionated, but actually, even when you look at a specific theory, you find the fractionation there as well. You mentioned higher order thought. You have so many versions of higher order theories.
Right. We don't know if they're different or the same in verbal variants, or like at this point.
Yes. So in an ideal scenario, we would have, let's oversimplify it. We will have two theories that are competing one against each other. We have way more than that. But even within each theory, as you rightfully say, we have many versions of the theory. So how can we make progress? So one way is to say, well, we are not testing any theory until they converge within their streams. So let all the higher order thought guys sit together, come up with a theory that they agree upon, and then we test them. We can wait for that. I'm not sure if that would come. So it seems to me as if what we need to do at this point is take the versions we have. And it could be that, we find that something is wrong with GNW, and then Bernie Bars or Jesse Prince come and say, well, I have a better version of GNW. So then this is a refinement of the theory, and that would lead us to an agreed upon consensus within the GNW camp, and we test that. But we won't be able to make any progress if we won't test any theory.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is all
starting
my everything I'm asking about is really aimed at the idea of the adversarial collaboration and testing theories in that way, and this model of science, which you guys are advocates of, and I'm not against either. Obviously, I'm involved in this project, so I just, that's what I'm thinking about. It's not like so it's only within the confines of that being your goal. I'm wondering, is that really what we're doing? Because it's sort of like, I read these articles, you know, I read there's Quanta, you know, just an article in The Economist or something. And what they're all saying is, we're going to narrow down the fields of theories. And here's one theory, it's called global workspace theory. And here's another theory, it's called IIT. And they don't mention that it's IIT 3.0 and that it could be, you know, IIT-N at some point, that there's these different versions of what, so it just seems to me that's I'm starting to worry that the message which is being sent out is a simplified one where the reality is a lot more complicated, and the science depends on us understanding the complications there. And I'm not against this project. I'm not trying to really be down on it. I'm just trying to, you know, be realistic about it, about what it's aiming to do, or at least as I understand. Anyway, I would like you guys to convince me that I'm being overly pessimistic.
I like to, you know, always, you know, like throw the ball at, you know, at you, which, you know, is fine. So let's assume that this is not the right way to do things, right? You know, like just for the moment. I mean, this is, you know, I'm not trying, and I'm not a trained philosopher, but I always, you know, like put myself in the counterfactual. You know, what is that? So how do you make progress? I would just ask you a very pragmatic and simple question, because so far,
well, you do what we're doing, but you bill it differently. Well, first, I would say we should have started by saying, recognizing that the real division in the landscape is between the higher order and the first order, and that every theory of consciousness that's ever been thought of or ever will be thought of is going to be one or the other of those two kinds of theories. That's the real thing. So, like, for instance, I was at this meeting and they were saying, gee, is it a problem that we're testing all just variants of higher order theories? It's like, but no one said that when you went to the IIT global workspace theory, where they were testing only first order theories. Why? Because people don't see that distinction. And when they think that they have a sort of bias towards the first order stuff, and that's fine. I had it as well, but there's this, I'm not saying that the other side is right. It's just that to see the landscape in the right way, I argue, so, you know, I'm biased in that way, that this is the right way to divide the field. And if you want to test these theories, you should be looking at, you know, this way of pitting them against each other. And then if you want to tell other people that you're like narrowing the field down and testing theories of consciousness, then you should be like, well, we're testing this guy's version of the theory of consciousness. And that's what the details of the paperwork say, but that's not what the big.
Right, but this is where, you know, what I'm trying to get at, Richard, is the part taking what Liad was saying, right? So absolutely, and I'm you know, like there with you. Like, I mean, I think that Camilo Signorelli actually puts things in an even like a nicer way, because he doesn't put like, you know, like first order or higher order, more like what are they explaining? Right. Which I think, if you ask me, I would actually partition the thing there, not where it's like in the front or in the back. It's like, what are they explaining? You know, I would start there.
Sorry, you're right. Let me just say that.
I would start there. You know.
No, hold on. You're right. Let me just say, I meant assuming you're trying to explain phenomenal consciousness, then you should divide things up this way. But your point is exactly right.
You know, so, but what I'm trying to say with that is that I take your point. What I'm trying to argue is, at the end, all of these things have imperfections, right? And the reason why you actually try to do it, because, as you know, any of these things is extremely difficult. As you pointed out, you know, we tried to actually do 3 adversaries. We failed grossly. Yeah. It just didn't work, right? Because actually, you know, like, it's not easy. Any of these adversarial projects actually extremely challenging. So, you know, at least my pragmatic point of view is, if I have to fight with my brother, I'd rather fight with 1 than with 2, you know, because usually you say, so this is, you know, like, I have a very large family, so, you know, and then eventually we will converge. So my point is, I hope that this will be done, you know, through this mechanism that we have now, that is incredible, that the Templeton Foundation is providing us this opportunity, right?
Absolutely,
but then hopefully, you know, like you and I and Liad and Mike and, you know, and everyone in the field can just do it in their own lab. Like, we don't need these things. Like, coming back to your initial point, like, why people are not doing this? I wonder myself. because like to have a brain and to make a prediction, any one of us can do it. You're right. So So
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
the answer, it seems to me, is that no one funds it if you try to do that until these guys. So that's why I'm not trying to badmouth them in any way. I'm just trying. I'm sensitive to the idea that there's a camp out there that thinks this message is sort of sending the wrong message, and that we're already a fragile field anyway, and we shouldn't be, anyway. So I'm not 100% convinced by that. But I'm not convinced by it either.
Let me ask you a question. I feel that my sense is that some people worry too much. I think that you ask me, I think that some people should just, relax, drink a beer, and just, yes, the world is imperfect. We have COVID, so I really worry about COVID.
Well, I mean, just to, I agree, but can I, before just one rejoinder to that before moving on, because the someone in question, if it were someone like me, would worry, maybe too much, that given what I was saying about this kind of almost like bias that is naturally had by people to ignore like a certain way of thinking about consciousness, and to intuitively conceptualize it in a certain way, that the relaxing lets that distinction get overlooked, and then confounds get basically introduced into every experiment. Like, for example, I would say a lot of experiments have the behavioral confound. They take behavior as evidence of consciousness, when according to the other approach, they're disassociable. So that's a complete assumption that's being made by almost everybody, without having sufficiently demonstrated that we can dismiss the other side. And if we could, that would be great. I would love to see it dismissed and move on with my life. And then I could start writing papers about it and saying, can someone please show why this is wrong? Which is, what I take my work to be an advertisement for, like, please falsify this theory so I can do something else. So I don't write those. I'm not trying to support the higher order theory. I'm actually, now if it doesn't get falsified, then great. But I would like to see people try to actually falsify a version of that theory rather than a cartoon version that's characterized in the wrong way, which is often what tends to happen. So the relaxing, if you relax too much, then the person like me will worry, we're not really making any progress. We're just sort of assuming something and ignoring, but we should do that other thing first. Or anyway, so that's what I'd say.
So I wonder though, so let's take your approach at face value. If this is the case, then all the other theories that neglect this point of view would have to, at least for some of the predictions, fail, right? So it could be that the results of experiments like ours and others would be that none of the theories get it right, in the sense that all their predictions pan out.
Yeah. Right.
And in that case, the conclusion would be, well, we must have been missing something. So that maybe we would understand that there is a premise that everyone assumes, then it's actually wrong. So I think what the three of us are trying to say is that we share your, I don't know if I refuse to kind of connect myself with the word pessimism. So I wouldn't say that we share your pessimism.
Your less optimistic view.
Yes, that, and to begin with, it's not as if we think that the three of us are going to end up with a belt and lines in it for the theories we kill, right? So that's not our goal. What we are trying to do is to try to understand exactly what the predictions are of the theories and where they get it right and where they get it wrong. And then each one could take that bunch of data and those conclusions and decide how they want to proceed with that. And one possible outcome would be exactly what you're saying, to say, okay, the field has been completely misguided. None of the theories get it right. What's going on here? Maybe we are overlooking an important possibility. Right. So in any case, I wouldn't, what I would really want to avoid, also because, we are putting so much work into it. And we wouldn't want to be at the end of the game is to say, okay, you know what, you did everything and you didn't change the field. Well, you know what, we are not trying to change the entire field. We're trying to make progress. we think that the way things have been done so far got us to one stage, and in order to make a step forward, and it doesn't have to be a huge step, but it has to be a step. Right. We need to do things differently, and that's what this project is all about, trying to do things differently and see where it gets us. So if we are all kind of modest also in our expectations of this, then we can gain a lot out of it. If we just end up checking this as, did they revolutionize the field? Well, we just want to make progress. And hopefully what we will be able to do is make progress in the right direction, and also maybe kind of set try to suggest a new way of doing things, because people have not done things through adversarial collaboration. And in our field, we didn't have such large scale studies. And we hope that would also kind of maybe change the standard a bit with respect to how much data we need to find a reliable conclusion, which is also an important question that we don't always ask.
Right. And I couldn't agree more with everything that you're saying. In fact, to be honest with you, I think the fact that that the projects have gotten everyone together to have these conversations and that we're still having them has already changed the field. I think it's already impacted the field positively, in my opinion. Whatever the results of the experiments are, I've been in the meetings and I've seen the progress. I've seen it happen where people understand the other side all of a sudden. They're like, exactly. Oh, that's what you're saying? Like, really? That? You're like, yeah, that's what I've been saying for 20 years, dude. It's like, it's amazing to see that happen in real life.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important parts of the project is the very beginning when you design the experiment, because that itself, whether we end up testing and challenging certain predictions, having the key, proponents or developers of these theories agree on an experimental design, like before you even collect data, that really hasn't been done very much at all. And I think there's a huge advantage. That's going to speed up progress. And if you're right, Richard, that a key distinction is higher order versus first order, then I would say we need to get more people in the same room coming up with experiments that they both agree on, one in whatever version of higher order and one whatever version of first order.
I agree.
Because I think we can really make progress there. And yeah, we could still make some progress if we have two different first orders, two different higher orders. Absolutely. I think it's still valuable, but yeah, I thought that was my favorite part of this project was getting Stan and Giulio to agree to run experiments that they probably would never have designed in their own lab.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's nice to see that people are thinking sort of in new ways, as you guys were saying. And we were talking about that just recently at one of these meetings. We were saying, let's not try to just do things that's already been done. This is an opportunity to actually like do something we would never thought of. So I think that just that spirit is so the Templeton Foundation deserves credit just for that. Dawid has just brought these people together and got them to talk to each other when that no one else has really been able to do.
And one aspect I think also, Richard, that gets overlooked, but I'm particularly sensitive to, is like the adversarial part is of course it's a critical part, right? But the Templeton went actually further, right? They push us all to do open science, right? And I want us to actually think about this, because this is where the individual parts and then the sum is actually something that we from my point of view, like the real meat of this is going to be when every one of these different camps has their data, pull their data, and then you can test your predictions. Like then we will say, so what would like Richard's theory say in an experiment such as this one?
Right.
And then you are going to have ECOG data, fMRI data, EMG data, and then you can go and test it. Right. So from my point of view, like having that, like you don't need to think about every single hypothesis beforehand. You can then just go and say, like, what happened if I collect all of this data that before I did not have, right? And I test any predictions of any theory. And here's the beauty, because you don't have to partition it between higher order and first order theories. You can say, like, okay, even like any theory that has different modes of explanation. Right. So at least to me, like, and this is what I was trying to say at the SSC, it's like I see this as the induction, like inference and deduction, right? So you can either start from a bottom-up approach, which to me would be like, what if we put all of the data together? What do we get, right? Or a top-down approach, like now we have all of this data. What would the theory say on this particular set of data? So you can have now this thing hand in hand. So if we are really smart in this is not going to be about the the project of Liad, Mike, and myself, or the project that you have. It's like the project that the field will have. And this is where I hope people will understand that this is the real change.
Right.
From my point of view, like this is the impact. And I hope that people will really harvest this data for many years to come, right? And students, you can train your students now. From your
exactly.
Go test this theory and this data that Lucia, Mike, and I, and Liad, collected, or whatever. Rachel, you see. So that we didn't have before.
Exactly. So we need you to collect all the data, then another pandemic, so everyone can go and analyze it for 2 years.
Exactly. And but you see like how smart the Templeton Foundation was, because it's not adversarial. Adversarial gets you going. That's it. But the real money is what comes after.
Right. No, I agree with you completely. So it's going to leave a lasting mark. And already it's already a kind of small field, but you see the influence of everywhere. I mean, I guess I was kind of a skeptic at the beginning about the influence that they had, but now I think of it as a good thing. I don't see why. I don't know. So I guess one reason why you might not see it as a good thing is because you might think that consciousness science isn't taken serious by people outside of the field. But maybe this is where your relax maxim should come in, the axiom of relaxation, because let me ask you guys, do the three of you worry as consciousness researchers about how people in the neurosciences outside, like at SFN, can you present a paper on consciousness at the SFN? I don't really think at a satellite conference maybe, but at the SFN main thing, can you do that now? Is that something that happens?
Yeah, there have been. There have been, symposia.
And there's no dinner talk afterwards about why was that there?
Well, I can tell you, when I started, people told me, and I actually tell my students that as well. If you want to study, if you're one of the crazy people who want to study consciousness, you should know that it's a minefield. And some people said, it's not a smart choice of career and so on. But I think it's the most interesting question in the world. Yeah, and I'm so happy to be studying that. And I think we're okay. We're doing our studies, and people get funded, and the community just thrives. So look at the number of people at ASSC that is just increasing. Look at the number of journals that are now, when I started, there was, I think, only maybe one class that was remotely related to consciousness at my university. Now we have a special program for studying consciousness in the brain. And you have many programs like that all over the world. So again, taking the role of the non-pessimistic person, I think that I actually think that if anything, these projects will make the world see us as, more seriously, because now we have, big data, open science, team science, we're using like the big cannons to study this question. So I'm not as worried. I don't know what you think, Mike or Lucia.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's changed. I mean, in the time that I've spent, in starting at grad school and after, I also had the similar advice that Leah got. Don't say that you study consciousness, when you go to your job talk. And one of my key mentors was Steve Hilliard at UCSD, and he, will freely admit he was interested in consciousness for his whole career, but that it wasn't accepted by the mainstream neuroscience. So he studied the closest thing he could think of, which was attention and perception. But I think it's changed, even over the last 20 years. So I mean, personally, I studied perception, color vision, and other types of perception in grad school, and then attention as a postdoc. But when I went to give a job talk, I said, I study consciousness, and my whole talk was about, and they hired me anyway. So I don't know, that's one example of, I think things are changing. It's a little bit faster, I think, in Europe than in the US to come around to the idea. I don't know why, but yeah, I'm pretty optimistic like Liad. I think our project, the projects that you're doing, and the field as a whole, I think is going to just continue to be considered a main part of the general what's presented at SFN, what's presented in the main neuroscience journals. I think we're carving out a nice niche sort of active, productive subtopic. Yeah. Hopefully hopefully we're right about that. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, hopefully no one's watching these videos 10 years from now being like, no.
But, can I tell you, like, so perhaps, I was trained in a very small country where we didn't have these considerations, so you just do what you like, so first of all, you don't really think about, you don't worry in that sense, but at the same time, so I don't think that I ever in my entire career, I have felt like I am in a fringe place. Like I just personally, like it has never happened to me that I felt that I'm in a fringe field. No. But second, and probably most importantly to me, is from my point of view, if we understand what consciousness is, we will be able to make better medical decisions. And the way in which I always put it is like, look, I don't, like, if we don't crack memory, yeah, sure, I will not remember whatever, If we don't crack attention, perhaps, like I crash into a car, If I don't understand consciousness, dude, we're gonna have problems.
Yeah.
So the way in which I always, when I had this discussion once, with I think with John Dylan Haynes, because he said like, you study consciousness, and he was like, what is this? And I said like, and you said you study attention. It's like, how do you measure that? I don't even know where that exists. What I can tell you is that consciousness does exist, just for the record.
Just for the record.
Just for the record. It's like whatever I'm studying exists. Whatever you are studying, it's an essence that you created in your mind. I don't even know whether that is real. Right. So sometimes I think that.
How did John take that? He was receptive to that idea.
Well, no, but I love it because with John we're super good friends, but it's just to push him. You see what I mean? Because part of, sometimes what I feel is happening to this field is that people don't understand the seriousness of the question.
Right.
You see, like we are not here, this is not. It might be a fringe thing, but it's a really important thing. And the fact that we don't understand it, that doesn't make it, more weird. It's like,
right.
the more it's the opposite. It's like we need to understand it. We are making decisions ethically, and etc. When kids are born or not, are they conscious or not, cars, whatever, this impacts us on a daily basis, right?
Right.
So the way in which I usually give job talks is to say like, look, this is what I study. And I'm not going to question whether it's important or not. If you don't see it, it's your problem. Like seriously,
Yeah.
So let's start with that. Now, I do take the challenge, which is like, how do we do it scientifically, right? But then, as a scientist, I say like, well, so because the problem is hard, I will just feel defeated just because. Will I accept that somebody doesn't hire me because they feel that it's too difficult of a problem? But you see, sometimes I think that we need to, because we are the field. So the way in which I think about it is like, we need to be the preachers, telling people like, look, this is what happened. This is the reason why you have to take this serious.
Right. I think, I've said this before, but I was talking with Claire just a few days ago, actually, about this very thing, because I was like, well, part of the thing which needs to be done is like us, like you are saying, going around talking, but also the ASSC, I think, needs to play this role. And they have started to do that more, I think, but it's, I think they need to be the public face of consciousness science or something like that. Public relations, there needs to be like, I don't know. I feel like, but when I was a graduate student, I knew there was a place I could go, was the ASSC. There were people there that cared about what I cared about, philosophers, scientists, all sorts of people, but they were interested in the same thing. It wasn't like going to Tucson where there were some people there. I was like, let's not hang out. All right, no offense. But I never felt that way at the ASSC. And so I felt like it was always like a like-minded group. And in the field, we sort of have that sense of ourselves, but it's not, I wonder if the public has that sense of it, because a lot of the discussion there is panpsychism and zombies, and I'm a philosopher and I love that shit. I do, but it's not science. It's not empirical science, and it's not going to do the thing that we're talking about here. And so a lot of the public discussion of, even around IIT, is about, logic gates and are they conscious and things like that, and not about like, how does it differ from global workspace theory? Because some people say they're the same theory, and other people think that they're like can't even be compared. It's like what? How can we make sense of that's the important things first? So yeah. Anyway, so I just wondered, do you guys agree that the ASSC should play this role, or do you think that really it's more an individual effort? Or I'm wondering about institutionalization.
I leave it to Liad because you should start, Liad.
I mean, I'll just say quickly, Liad, I'll let you talk about ASSC, but I think the conferences and communities are really, really important. And I had a similar feeling as you, Richard, trying to figure out, where's a good community of like-minded, have this view that we need to study consciousness seriously from a scientific perspective. And I only started going to ASC, I think, 2012 or 2013, and it just immediately was like, yes, this is exactly, I've never been to the Tucson meeting, but I've heard things, good and bad, but but I think having that community, first of all, is for the members themselves, to share data, but I think you're right, it can play a key role in the PR and to say, if you have questions about what this field is really doing, what kind of things we're studying, come to a conference and see what these talks are like, and you'll immediately see, this is serious neuroscience, serious psychological research being seriously interacting with philosophy, which I think is really important.
Exactly. And just before some jumping in, so people are talking about the Tucson conference in the chat over here, but I'm not against Tucson. I've been there lots of times. I presented there actually, but what I'm against is that it's called the Science of Consciousness Conference. That's what I'm against, because it doesn't represent the field of the science of consciousness, in my opinion. I think of it as like how the light gets in. It's like that sort of public festival-y thing with some scientists and some non, whatever. It's a bunch of stuff, but it's not like the ASSC. And people go there and they think, oh, this is the science of consciousness. And they see stuff, which, I'm not against. I'm a philosopher. I take all ideas seriously. And I've talked to, on this thing, people from all over the spectrum, because I'm generally curious and I don't really have settled views, and I'm not here to grind axes or anything or tear down the conference. So Tucson, I'm not against it, but I do think that people get the wrong idea from the title of the conference, and that people think of it as the kind of representative, the Center for Consciousness Science Studies at Arizona. So I think the SSC should intercede more in the official sense and be like, no, actually that's like one guy and another person running it. This is actual, there's a committee, there are people that vote, we have actual government. It's like a different thing. So anyway, that's my spiel about that. I think that's well known anyway, in my opinion, but sorry.
Can I just probably ask you a little bit more, Richard? Like, what is the worry? Like, I'm kind of like missing I feel like lost in translation. So what is the problem? As you see it.
The problem is that if someone goes according to me, if someone goes to the Tucson conferences and thinks this is the science of consciousness, then they're gonna think it's a circus with no progress and no serious scientific method, and anything is allowed, and it's just they're going to get the wrong impression about what the science of consciousness is. And if people think of that as the main representative of the science of consciousness, then I think that it doesn't do a good job of presenting what I think of as the science of consciousness. Maybe, yeah. Maybe it's what I'm thinking of as the neuroscience of consciousness, or the cognitive neuroscience of consciousness. But that's what I think the ASSC is interested in. And when they say the Association for the Scientific Study, the S there, the second S is like the cognitive neuroscientific study or something like that, as I interpret it. And that's not what's going on at the Tucson conference. And it's not bad, but you shouldn't call it the science of consciousness, according to me.
But like, just for the, playing devil's advocate, right? So
yeah.
What I always, what I'm trying to think about is whoever goes to that conference or this other conference or the SFN or to whatever conference where we present our work, what I would expect is that any consumer of information digest that information in a meaningful way. Like, so what I do with my kid is I present him like a lot of views, and then I let him choose.
Right.
So what I feel that part of the exercise is people can take the plurality. They can take whatever they feel it is, and then take part to what they think is the right way. Like I'm a little bit suspicious about this idea of ruling. It's like, we are the right ones, you are the wrong ones. You know, like that part, I mean, I have to tell you that.
Well, where is the right and the wrong come?
You know, or we are the scientists and you are not. You know, or we are the good ones and you're the bad ones. Like, you know, to me, it's like people just do stuff, you know, and then I hope
what did the panpsychists do?
Well, I don't know, but you know, like, but I don't think that I need to rule them. What I mean, you know, with these.
But panpsychists aren't interested in the science of consciousness in the way that we are.
Correct.
Because their theory can't be empirically tested. It's not an empirical theory, and that's not a mark against it. It's just, it's weird to think that that's part of the science of consciousness. It just doesn't, it's not a good or bad thing. It's just a thing. So I don't think that I'm doing the thing that you're saying. I think actually
I take your point, but what I would imagine is that somebody goes and, you know, you present them with that view, and then that person comes and says, well, but this is not, you know, it cannot be testable. So then it reaches that conclusion. I don't have to.
So then why call it science?
You know.
Why have it at a science conference then?
Because, for instance, in Tucson, actually, there is many, it's very plural. As much as there is talks on that, there's also things on neuroscience, right? Yeah. And, you know, so I think that in a sense, like, you know, I guess that what they are trying to do there, like, I don't know, like, I'm literally just trying to be, you know, naive here, you know, but I guess that what they are trying to present is the broad spectrum from here to here.
Have you ever presented your work there?
Yes.
But I also think that we can make it a kind of take a bigger picture look at this. And I think that it seems to me that this discussion is driven by this fear that we won't be considered as a science, that we won't be taken seriously. And again, it could be my naivety or my optimism. I think we are kind of past that stage.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of
there
was a lot of legwork,
that's not the point.
A lot of legwork and, you know, foundational work that was made, and we owe that. So, you know, to Christoph and to Nancy Kanwisher and to many of the cognitive psychologists that lay the ground, and, you know, I'm going back to Marcel's work in France and Bernard Bars and others that kind of persuaded the community that this is science and that we can do things, we can study this question empirically. It's not only a philosophical question. And, you know, just to kind of give you a small observation from Itai Yaron's work in the contrast database, when you can ask what journal is the journal where most of the studies that we looked at was published. It's not Consciousness and Cognition, and it's not Journal of Consciousness Studies, and it's not the Neuroscience of Consciousness. It's actually Neuroimage. Right. So it's a completely neuroscientific general journal, and most papers about consciousness and the neurocorrelates of consciousness actually, you know, were published there. That this is what we found. So I don't think that we need to be apologetic about what we're doing. We are studying consciousness. We're using psychological, empirical, neuroscientific tools. And if someone has a problem with the science, let's talk about the science. Yeah. Let's talk about the way we do it.
I mean, I wasn't trying to make, I agree with all you guys with what you're saying. But I was talking about the role the ASSC should play.
Mm-hmm. No, so I agree. So I think, so I'm not.
But hold on, just to cut you off. I know I should stop doing that, but I won't.
No, that's fine.
The ASSC isn't playing that role, but sorry.
We're used to that. That's fine.
No, I set myself up for that. Okay, so by the way, it's getting really late. So if you want to tell us it's too late, I just remembered you're in Israel. So yeah.
I'm enjoying this. I can go on forever. So you will have to stop me and not the other way around. So.
Okay. I'm having fun too. So I know this is going to be a bad cover. We're going to be up all night. But because so what I was saying was it's not driven by fear. It's driven by perception of reality, as I see it. So the thing I was trying to say, but not well, I think, because what you guys were saying. But anyway, so what I was trying to say was that I thought the SSC should be playing a certain role. And instead, I think that the Center for Consciousness Studies is actually playing that role. And I would rather the SSC do it. That's what I'm saying. So I think that the average person who isn't a scientist or a philosopher thinks of that conference as the main conference In fact, when I was coming in for tenure and I presented there, they presented me as giving a talk at the main conference in my field. And I was like, what? I don't know if I really agree with that, because it's not actually the main conference. The SSC is, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know. So this is something that needs to be tested, right? It's an empirical question. How which of the two conferences is perceived as most important by people outside and within the field? I've given.
Well, I think just empirically, more laypersons go to Tucson than go to ASSC. I just think that's already established. The ASSC is largely professionals or laypersons who are themselves scientists from other fields, perhaps.
So
Tucson,
what I can tell you, I don't know.
goes.
So what I can tell you, I'm actually a member in the members committee of the ISSC. So I get all the applications, and one of the people who approves, and we get applications from scholars, from students, and also from lay people. Many of them actually, at least the ones that end up on my inbox. So there could be more, there could be less. You have to also remember that this is indeed a scientific conference, right? So at the end of the day, I think Lucia and Mike could attest. I'm really for scientific dissemination of knowledge. I think I do quite a lot of that. So I welcome all lay people, to be interested in consciousness, and think it's very important.
Yes,
but yes. I'm not sure that these, counting how many people come to this or that conference would make a big difference. I can tell you one thing. So Axel Clearmans just gave a talk in Frontiers in their big events.
I saw
and
that.
More than 3,000 people came to hear what he has to say about consciousness. So I think that the public is interested. I think that they are getting many ideas about how to study consciousness and what people have been doing, and they are, they should be the one to judge. And I think ASSC is doing.
But is that so? Just to be the devil's advocate. Well, I guess already someone here's the devil's advocate, so I'll be the other devil's advocate, whatever, the demon's advocate, whatever. So if you went to the SFN and there was a talk on dualism, you would be like, that's normal? That seems okay. Like if they were talking about panpsychism at the Society for Neuroscience and stuff like that.
But the Society of Neuroscience is not about philosophy. But if you go to ASSC,
right? But my point is that the Tucson conference is called The Science of Consciousness, and you show up and you hear about panpsychism and idealism.
But in ASSC,
that's not science.
But in ASSC, couldn't you hear about panpsychism or dualism? You could have a talk about that, and people would, about
the scientifically testable aspects of it.
I'm not sure. So in the last ASSC, we had plenty of purely philosophical, talks. There was a session that was almost all of it was completely philosophical, and people gave theories, models of consciousness, and so on and so forth. So I think the beautiful thing about our field is that it ties together people from so many disciplines. You have philosophy, and you have computer science, and you have neuroscience, you have psychology, you have biology, and because you have physics, because it's a complicated question.
Right.
And ultimately you are the judge. So you go to a conference, you hear a talk about panpsychism, you are not convinced, that's fine. But also to kind of ignore that and say that doesn't exist, I'm also not sure that would be.
But that's not the point. So those aren't the options. The options are have it exist, but don't call it science. And when you are going to a science conference, present science. Those are the options. Those are the things that I'm. So I'm not saying no one should talk about panpsychism. I actually love panpsychism. I've had thousands of panpsychists on this very channel. Idealists. Do you know there still are idealists? Yeah, I've talked to him. Bernardo Kastrup's one. He's an interesting, smart guy. I talked to a solipsist. I'm not saying there's no place for those people in consciousness studies. I love those people. I talk to them all the time. I don't think that they're doing the science of consciousness, and I don't present them as having things to say about the science of consciousness. And I just think that it's a little bit weird to say this is a conference. It used to be called Toward a Science of Consciousness. And now
that's what I was going to say.
Like now it is the science of consciousness. So it just seems weird. It doesn't seem representative of what I think of as the science of consciousness, not of consciousness studies, which is a broader thing, which is encompassing all these other things. But that's my personal assessment. I think there's room to disagree. So I'm not saying you're wrong and I'm right. I'm just saying, and I'm just trying to really, what I'm being defensive about is that it's not coming from a place of fear, of judgment. I just think that it's not really an accurate representation of what I think of as the science of consciousness. But a lot of people go there and say, oh, that's what you do. And I'm like, no, that's not what we do, actually. Go to these small sessions, like these 5 sessions of there, and you might see something like what we do. But anyway, so that's what I was saying, in that I wish that the ASSC would step up more and be the public face of the science of consciousness and be like, no, we represent this field. And those guys are not illegitimate and they shouldn't be scorned, but they're interested in a different set of questions, like a broader set of questions. And so obviously there's going to be, theoretical presentations at a scientific meeting, but I assume it's presented in the spirit of, hey, we need to pay attention to these in order to test the things we care about. Whereas over there, it's not. I mean, you have Deepak Chopra there talking about something that's like, there's nothing testable at all in what he's talking about. And I'm personally skeptical of his like moral and ethical system. I just think it's like, that's not the science of consciousness. And I resent them calling it that, actually. So, maybe I'm taking it too personally. I should lighten up and have a beer. It's been recommended several times. So I have to do it eventually.
I actually think I'm kind of with you there, Richard. I think it's, I don't know if maybe Lucia and Liad are giving a little too much credit to the average consumer, the non-scientist consumer, to kind of trust that they will be able to tell the difference between, scientific evidence and I don't know. I think there is a lingering PR issue, and maybe ASSC could do something there to really establish itself as like the main venue for serious scientific research on consciousness. But that being said, I've never been to the Tucson conference, and I'm with you that I'm very open-minded. Maybe there's some things that aren't scientifically testable now, but we could still discuss them. Right. But if it's something that's complete pseudoscience and outside of the realm of ever being tested, I agree. I don't think it deserves to be called
if it was called like the science and philosophy and spirituality of consciousness, I would say that's a perfect name for it. That's what it is, actually. That's what's happening there. Right. But it's not built that way. And so anyway, and I don't want it to disappear. I've presented there. I've given poster presentations, concurrent talks. I gave a plenary talk. So I've been there. I'm not against it. I just want people to know what we're doing. I want the public to actually know what the science of consciousness is about.
I'm with you in that sense. So the last time I've been to Tucson was 8 years ago, the only time actually. And ASCC is my go-to venue, right? I'm just saying I don't feel comfortable. I just don't want to be in the judgmental role here, especially because I haven't been there in the last few years. And no,
I totally understand that. And I'm just quibbling about the name. That's the only thing that bothered me. They changed it. They just changed it they just why didn't they just call it the science and spirituality of consciousness? Great. I would have loved that conference, but
I think maybe part of what's like underlying this, and something we talked about earlier, why some of us, were advised to not say we studied consciousness, why maybe it was more difficult to get jobs and funding and so on. I mean, is related to this. It's that consciousness is considered by many outside of the neuroscience of consciousness as sort of like the spiritual thing that we can't touch with science. That and I think that's part of what's really interesting about it is you've seen these huge revolutions in the history of science, right? The sun doesn't revolve around the earth; it's the other way around. We're related to all other species, like these huge. And I think figuring out how consciousness is generated by the brain, if we're able to do that, whether it's 20, 50, 100 years from now, I think could be the next huge step. And I mean, it's going to have these societal impacts, right? It touches on life after death. It touches on sort of the meaning of existence. It gets pretty deep. So I think some of that cultural and social baggage comes into play when we're talking about these. What do we count as a real study of consciousness or science of consciousness?
And I want
I
to
couldn't agree
give
more, right.
a different perspective, which I did find enriching, from those kind of conferences in general, which is like sometimes you get exposed to different perspectives, like, say Buddhism, and, my entry into the neuroscience of consciousness was Francisco Varela, and what he was trying to do was exactly to bridge, like these things that were more like mystical,
Right.
And some of those are completely non-scientific, and some of those, in his program, he was trying to make them scientific. But it's sometimes those dialogues, like if anything, I would actually say that what I miss in the SSC is that it's too, like, to align towards one set of philosophies,
Right.
and one set of thinking, right? And I think that, personally, I like I like to challenge myself. It's like, okay, if I'm right, then this means that, like, I can talk to some other people and, see which ways they are wrong, or sometimes even get enriched by their tradition. So I do think, even for the public, like, let's assume that we drop the S, because I take your point that, it's also trying to narrow it down in such a way that is also not representative of what they are doing. So in that sense, like,
Right.
science and spirituality would be much better. But as a
Right.
conference in and of itself, I think that is rich when we are exposed to these different perspectives, right? And actually, I would say that hopefully the ASSC would have more of that, which, remember, is a little bit too narrow in some sense, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I couldn't agree more that the value of philosophy is exactly what you said. It challenges your preconceptions, sometimes I get criticized, like, why are you talking to this person? They think plants are conscious. It's like, I don't know. It's really hard to dismiss someone. It's a lot hard. It's really easy to dismiss someone. It's a lot harder to say, why would someone who's intelligent say this thing, which I think is very strange? And I enjoy trying to work myself into the way they see it, so that I want to and that's kind of what the project I have and that you guys are here for is I want to see things from your point of view, so to speak. So that's why when I'm saying, what about this, what about that, I'm really trying to work my way into, okay, so when you think that, this is how you would respond to it, rather than like I'm trying to tear down what you're saying. And I wish more people would adopt that. I'm not saying, I have discovered some new thing, but I do wish that more discussions were, the aim was trying to understand the other person, as opposed to just waiting for your turn to make your point and yell at the person.
Absolutely. I think that, but don't you agree that, part of the adversarial collaboration is exactly this. So what I took as the most important part of this is that sometimes the camps are completely like deaf.
Yeah.
You see, in the sense of, like, I'm talking to you, like, apparently, but I'm not talking to you. You don't understand even what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Right. So it was at least the person, was amazing to understand the disagreements and how much they couldn't understand each other.
Right. Even though they're writing papers, disagreeing with each other and saying things.
Yes.
Like, you're like, what?
Exactly.
Exactly.
And I thought it was so beautiful. And I remember, like, this was, back in the day when I was working on synchrony. Like, I remember having a discussion, back in Chile, and I said, like, why don't we talk about the people that actually think that this is rape code? And they was like, because it's yes, it's not right. I said, well, I don't know. I mean, there's actually kind of like smart people thinking about that. So
I know
that silly cannot be.
That's true everywhere, though, because, like, I joked at the beginning that I think of myself less of a philosopher and more of a failed neuroscientist, because I did think at one point of going into switching from philosophy to neuroscience, and I ended up not doing it because I worked in animals and I just couldn't handle it. I did surgeries on rats and it was just like too much for me. I started having nightmares, and anyway, I'm a vegetarian, I'm a vegan, so I was just like, could not do it. But I'm not against the idea of the research. Obviously, I support animal research, and I can happily have that argument, which I thought was great that we had that discussion at the SSC, by the way. Anyway, so I kind of gave up on that, and then I did some EEG stuff. I did ERP stuff at SF State, but it's amazing to see, like, the two camps, because when the, like, intracranial people, like when I was putting electrodes into the rats, when they found out I had done EEG stuff, they're like, oh, that's not serious. Like, what do you, like, no one takes that seriously. You don't even know where the brain, what it's doing. Ha, ha, ha. Like, it just like complete, like, laugh. That's soft science. Like, they were calling it, like, like the way physicists talk about psychology. That's how they were talking about EEG stuff. I was like, what? So then I was a student, and that's how they're talking to a student. And then meanwhile, on the other side, the EEG people are talking about those guys. Oh, they don't. Anyway, so I agree with what you're saying, but it's also, the fields are just so people don't understand, like neuroscience is not a thing. There are all these little camps. There are the electrophys people, there are the EEG people, there are the cellular people, there are the physiology people, and they barely talk to each other. So anytime you get people talking to each other, I'm super for it across disciplines. And so I agree with exactly what you're saying. The only point out my rambling story was about was that it's not specific to consciousness. This is like, it's worse than you think out there as far as like fractionalization.
Yes,
Definitely. There is this paper by Snow from the 50s or 60s talking about the two cultures of the intellectuals versus the scientists and how they don't collaborate and they don't find common language.
Right.
And what I find is that whenever you have crosstalk, whether that is between disciplines or, you know, between theories or between subfields in the same discipline, it's always enriching. Yeah. And, you know, as part of the free will thing that is led by Uri Maoz, it's the neurophilosophy of free will. You have their philosophers and neuroscientists, and every experiment that we do, we actually run by the philosophers and they tell us what is the philosophical meaning of the experiment if this result comes out of it. And that is such an amazing exercise. And it gets us to refine the experiments. So I think crosstalk. That's
really cool, actually. Yeah.
It is good.
Every lab should have a resident philosopher.
I agree. I couldn't agree more.
Actually, two of them, because they will disagree in a way that's interesting and important for the.
So I think, you know, whenever you can break a boundary and have crosstalk, that will benefit both sides. So we should definitely do that.
Exactly. I can tell you that, for instance, for us, like David Chalmers did that. And he was like, we had our table of printing, was like, that doesn't check, that doesn't check, that doesn't check. I was like, oh my God, okay, he's right. You know, it was just so beautiful, you know, like, yeah, you guys are trained in a different way. You know?
It's good to see that too, because it's so much has changed. When I was a student, I was a philosophy major, and I'd go into the labs, and they'd be like, "You're a philosopher. What do you do all day?" And I was like, I read your papers and try to like figure out what the heck you're talking about. That's what I do all day. And they're like, oh, okay, that might be useful. I was like, thanks. So I do, but there's like these territorialness, these boundaries. So I agree. It's quite difficult to, science is hard, and people don't really realize this. I went to my first interdisciplinary conference, and it was on, you know, electrophys and geneticists. And I was like, you guys are both neuroscientists. And they're like, nope. So
do you have an idea why? Because I see that, and you know, to me this is problematic. I feel that, you know, we cannot advance if we don't take the other perspective serious.
Yeah.
You know, like, seriously, like, you know, this is just a more like philosophical, but you know, from my point of view, like I cannot, like, I just take. I might not agree with your position, but I take it as to be an intelligent position. Right. I just need to find out why I disagree. You know. If so, sometimes even I find out that actually I don't disagree. Like, so why is that we do that all the time? And why can't we just not, you know?
I mean, that's a whole nother discussion, by the way. So, but I'd say it had a lot to do with the way you fund things and competition and in the university, obviously, is the way it exists. But if it were up to me, I would wave a wand and just give everybody who wants money for research, I just give it to them and say, some people will waste it. I don't care. Like, just let people do it. And smart people like you will take that money and the field will advance beyond a while, and you won't have to write grants anymore. I just don't, I think a lot of your guys' time is, when I first found out how much time you guys spend writing grants, I was like flabbergasted, shocked. Like how much effort, time, care, and like how the odds, you have to like math it out. Okay, if like only these numbers are accepted and I'll submit 20 this year, I should be good. It's like a whole, it's like philosophers don't think that way, and we're so lucky.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if you could just prove yourself as, you know, I'm a decent scientist, I ask good questions, can I have some funds? And you don't have to spend half or 2/3 of your year trying to get the funding.
Yeah, I know, but there's this yeah, even at the university, like if I go to a conference, they treat me like I'm a criminal. Prove that you got on the plane. You're stealing from us. Prove that you you gave the conference. I was like, I did. It's recorded. It's on YouTube. Like, oh my goodness. But anyway, so yeah, that's a whole different conversation.
It is.
But one quick thing about the camps and you know, the different, especially like within a certain science, I wonder if part of what we need is just better general science education to teach students how the sciences are linked together.
Right.
I don't know if any of you read E.O. Wilson's book Consilience, or I came across this book, as an undergrad, and it was just lucky kind of happened on it, and just it really explained how all of the all of the sciences are related, and they're looking at different levels of reality, different
Right.
from microscopic and all the way up.
Yeah, but then you'd have to do philosophy of science, and people don't want
Right.
philosophy.
Right. Maybe
that's what you're talking
I was a
about.
philosophy minor. Maybe that's where I got it. But I think that could help to try to reduce the sort of people getting into camps and saying this is the best, the most hardcore science, and everything else is.
Yeah, but it's the scientists themselves that need it the most, and that it's especially funny to me. Not in our area so much, but like in physics, especially. They're like, "Oh, you philosophers, we don't need you." It's like, don't you though? Yeah, you maybe not to do your experiments, but to understand what it means. I'm not saying scientists can't do philosophy. In fact, I think a lot of them do. It's just a lot of them tend to not do it well.
Right.
So do a lot of philosophers, obviously. So it's hard. But it's I think, you guys, I just want to commend you. First of all, I know I've been grilling you for 2 hours almost now. I just realized, but your commitment to these ideas, I just want to say it's really commendable that not only are you saying like we think open science is important, but you're like, now this is part of the record. Like here, all of our worries, all of our discussion, people should be privy to this, I think, which is why, the project that I have is like on YouTube. If people care, they can watch it. It's like C-SPAN, like no one will maybe, but it's there if you want it. But there's not a lot of that. People are afraid to put their reputations online. They don't want to look stupid or whatever. They don't want to be shown to be wrong. But I always thought scientists should love to be shown to be wrong. That's how progress is made. I would love to be. That's why I was saying at the beginning, I'd love for the higher order theory to be falsified. That would, to me, would just like make my day. But people get really invested in their theories, and of course, that's where the problem arises.
And that's a huge problem.
Yeah,
it's really huge, Richard. And this is where like Mike's point with education is really important. And I keep telling my students, like, you know what? It's true. It's extremely, and I always tell them, like, if you want to become a scientist, roll up your arms, because you're gonna learn when you fail. Every time you actually, don't fail, you get to publish the paper, but you learn nothing. So just for the, so roll up your arms, because it's gonna be hard, and you want to be shown wrong,
right.
Because this is when you learn, so we have been talking about the adversarial part, like people, obsess about who wins. I obsess about actually who loses. That I think is the real money. It's like I will learn. So if this is wrong, then I will learn something. You see? So
Exactly.
So why can we not train people to also understand that this is an opportunity?
Maybe I can share something from my experience. So that paper I was talking about when we started this conversation, that actually ended up, making me come to Christoph's lab as a postdoc, was a paper in Psych Science where I found that objects and scenes could be integrated unconsciously. And then to this day, I remember the moment where I got an email where I was asked to review a paper that tried to replicate my findings and failed. And I remember the feeling in my body when I got that email. It wasn't a nice moment, right? And then, so I can totally relate to why people don't like to fail or to be proven wrong. And I thought at that point, that's the end of my academic career, because that was my big finding, and that was what got me my postdoc. And then I took a deep breath and I said, okay, that's what happened. First, let's review the paper. I reviewed it. I thought they did everything right. And then I said, I will try to replicate this finding. And I tried and I failed as well. So I said, let's just own up my mistake and say that, I was wrong, and now I publish it myself and I'm fine with it. And I really think that was one of the most important experiences I had as a scientist. And it completely changed the way I work in the lab. Now in my lab now, everything is pre-registered. We never publish anything without replicating it first in the lab, because, I don't want to be in that situation again. Right. So I am so grateful for that thing that happened to me. It wasn't fun. It wasn't easy. It wasn't, something I enjoyed. but I really think that it improved my work tremendously. So
Right.
I couldn't agree more with the sentence, let's fail. It's important to fail. It improves us. It improves the science that we're doing. So
Yeah.
let's not fear of that. And if we
It's
understand
interesting
that
that you're
I
saying
think the
that.
important thing is to understand that we are not the story.
Right.
Once we understand that it's not about me, it's not about Liad's finding, it's about the finding, if it's
Yeah.
true or not, then everything becomes easier. It's still not, I wouldn't want to be in that situation again where someone, I get an email saying one of my findings is wrong. But if it does happen again, I will certainly won't have that feeling in my body again, because I now know it's not the end of the world. It doesn't reflect on me. It was a everyone makes mistakes all the time. And this is how we learn, and this is how we improve.
That's sort of what Mike was saying earlier, actually, relates, I think, to this, because your fear, like, of your security, like, you got to eat, you got to live, right? You're a person as well as a scientist. So this is a job. Your success at your job is linked to your success at finding something, of being the person who found that, right? And your name gets associated with it. Whereas what Mike was saying, which I thought was so interesting and important, was that actually we should reconceptualize it maybe and think the person we want is the person who asks good questions and can think of a way to answer it. And maybe doesn't always get it right, but it's the thing that should get rewarded is, are you a good question asker? Then, like, go do it. And let the community sort out, who's right and wrong. That's what science does. But instead, what we tend to reward is, like, who's got the flashy result, the theory, that the model or whatever that, is the thing that we're all going to, working memory. Ooh, we all know Bataille's name, right? So because of the model he came up with, but as opposed to because he asked good questions, or, so I think that's, I don't know how we change that. That's a systemic thing. Obviously, there's no one thing to do, but I do think that's part of the issue here, is that we pin the success to being a good scientist, to making a discovery or something like that, which is just it's not 1875. It's like hard to do that.
Yeah. But you see, like, part of my utopia is that, through these projects, again, and the open science component, we might actually, like, get past that thing. So think about, like, now in my imaginary world, like, at night, I think of this utopia of, crowdsourced science, where, we just, you and I, whatever, I just, imagine that you bet on an experiment. And then, Liad collects 10 subjects, Mike 2, you 1, and then, we all put the data there, and then we bet on hypothesis. And we're all right or all wrong.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Whatever. You see what I mean? Wouldn't that be, it's like, who cares whether it's IIT, GNW, your senior? It's like, if you have a cool experiment, you think that this is going to answer consciousness, well, let's do it together.
Exactly. That is a utopia. I'd love to live there. And it's, because I think that we were talking about science education and perception of science and sort of this, I mean, we got into these broad topics, and, sorry for not going through all the details of cool experiments. And by the way, I'm going to harass each of you individually to come back and talk to me one-on-one about your own work, because I think this group project is cool, but actually I was reading your individual papers and I was like, talk about that too. So anyway, sorry to bother you, but I'll probably get that email from me. But I think that part of this education thing that we were talking about is super important. Because of people's perception of what scientists do and how they do the job that they do. Anyway, so I lost my train of thought when I was thinking about something else, but that probably means that we've been talking a long time if I can't remember what I was about to say. So this might be a good time to segue, although I felt like I was about to say something, so maybe it'll come back to me. But at this point, I usually like to ask, after we've been talking for a long time, whether there was anything which you really wanted to talk about or were hoping or sort of expecting that would come up at some point, but that hasn't. So you can say no, but I just wonder if maybe some has. No? But I
have a question.
Okay.
So, say, imagine that, we roll time, 10 years. What would it mean that we fail?
Do we as a discipline?
This project, for instance, what would it mean a failure for this project?
Oh, for the project, not for the neuroscience of consciousness. Mm-hmm. What would it mean for it to have failed? In my opinion, it would have failed if people thought that an approach that shouldn't be dismissed was dismissed. that they cited this as an easy way to dismiss it in the first line of an introductory paragraph. We don't have to take that theory seriously, parentheses, this project 2023. But the danger there being that maybe the question, it's not, maybe it's more complicated than that, and that it only challenges the theory, but they have a response to it. So it does seem, that would be my, if you want to say what failure is, to me, that's it. It sends the message out that there's a silver bullet experiment. It was done, and these guys lost, and now we can just like, there will always be the diehards who don't give up, yuck, yuck, but we can not really worry about it. That to me would be failure. Now, I'm not saying that I don't think that's gonna happen, but if that did happen, I would be like, oh man, that was a bad call.
So would you, thinking again about education, so do you think that we should train people to do philosophy of science?
Oh yeah. In fact, at the community, I teach at a community college, and we have a philosophy of science general ed class. And we're trying to get it into the scientific world general ed category thing, and they're fighting us on it. But I actually think, no, it belongs in there. They're like, it's not science. And we're like, but you need to understand science, right? And they're like, but it's not science. We're like, but so yes, I think everyone should, that's interested, should have some general introduction to the philosophy of science, some understanding of it. And a lot of these issues, by the way, that reminds me of what I was trying to say earlier, which was that I think that there is this kind of general, this general perception amongst a certain kind of layperson that like the things that we call science are just too abstract, too complicated, that they can't understand them, that it's all hidden behind a smoke screen or something like that. But like the science of, like I joked about the 1870s, but of course the joke is that you could do it yourself. You could go in your basement and what the scientist said, I'll chop the frog up and hook up the electrodes and look at the leg go, I'll be danged. It was all accessible, but now to do any of this stuff, you need an fMRI scanner or, near infrared spectroscopy, whatever. You need all kinds of fancy stuff, which the average person doesn't have access to. So one way this might help is that data which is out there, and if you could, like, as a person, query it and be like, what happens if you ran it this way? Then you might get some of that pessimism. Because I've heard people, like, I go on these YouTube channels that are for the average person sometimes, and they'll say things like, why should I believe you, science person? Like, I didn't see that data. I didn't do that experiment. I have no idea what you're talking about. Why should I take you seriously? Now, I don't think that kind of skepticism is justified, but I sort of understand it in a way like, yeah, they have no idea what we're talking about, why these methods are good, or like why we trust them and what double disassociations are, or any of these things that we like put a lot of like faith in, actually. They don't know why. And I see that as legitimate skepticism because no one's ever told them why they should trust that stuff. So if you're an empirically minded person, you should be skeptical of that. And so that's because they don't understand the methodology or what we're doing. And so, that's why I think that the philosophy of science stuff is important.
Yeah, and even more so the Allen Institute, for instance, does that. And what is really cool is like now every, college students or anyone actually can download those data, but also you can think about people from, continents or countries that, it's not just about kids, or whoever, like, in Chile, for instance, we would not have an IMG, never, ever, and even if they want to, buy one, I would say, like, you solve poverty and don't buy an IMG. Right. You see, so I think that part of that is also the cool, like the society science. You see, it's like now, you can just make it really democratic. And I think, you see, that's why I'm so excited about these things. It's like I feel like people don't understand. Like I keep telling my students when I did my PhD in Chile, I did not have access to any journal. Luckily, I had a friend who was doing his PhD at Columbia University who gave me, his access code so they could actually download the fucking paper, and read actually what I wanted to read. You see, sometimes you have barriers that people don't even understand.
I know. Yeah, the same as I'm at a community college. It's the same. I don't have access to these highfalutin journals. I have to email Hawkwan and be like, "Hey, can you get me this journal, this article?" It's like this is my area of research. I can't even access the things which I'm trying to read.
But you see, I think the part of this is we need to, through this, hopefully, we will just turn the wheel because it's enough. This is public money. Everyone is paying for this. Anyone should have access to it.
And I agree 100%. But the other side of access is understanding. So if you just give them access to it, but they don't know what they're looking at, then that's only half the equation. So I agree with you, but that's where the education bit comes in. They need to know like what it means. And, like I talk to people like scientists, Like, what is a p-value? What does it mean? You get 6 different answers. Like, okay, so
which is why dissemination of knowledge is so important. I actually thought about something that I would like to add at the end.
okay, cool.
So usually here we kind of caught up in the conversation that we forgot to acknowledge the many people who work in this consortium. So here the 3 of us are with you, but this is a huge group. Due to time, we can't name everyone, but we welcome everyone here who's listening or watching to go onto the Cogitate website and see all the postdocs who are doing an amazing work. I really cannot spell out like the amount of work that is included in this project and the amount of complications, doing team science, open science, when you're a postdoc. Here's Lucia showing us some of the postdocs who just met today. So this is an outstanding group, and the 3 of us just learn from them all the time, from the postdocs, from the PIs, of course, the adversaries themselves, Julio and Stan, who had the courage to kind of put their theories on the line, and the advisors that we have, and Christoph and Francis and Dave and others, and really a beautiful group of talented and devoted people. So we owe them so much, and I really welcome each and every one of the people who are here. If you want to know who's really doing the work, go onto our website and see them. They are.
I'll put a link to the Cogitate website.
Please do.
So that people can check it out. It's nice. It's nice. It's a nice website, actually. It says it's done by WordPress on WordPress. So I was like, wow, it looks pretty good, actually.
Not only that, I said, talking about the sociology of this and all of the problems, in science. Like, imagine what it takes to be a postdoc in this project. So because one thing is like the hard work that they do. Like, yes, I acknowledge that, and this is great, but I want you to understand the courage. I mean, it's not about the work, because everyone is, hardworking, but, it takes somebody who has courage to, embark in a crazy thing, saying like, oh, okay, look, I made work, like 3 years, like I will work all the time. And then it might end up with 1, paper, with 2 papers max, and, and in a
we hope there will be more. We hope there will be
whatever. It doesn't matter. What I mean is that,
no, you're making a great point.
It's not the same, like, so it doesn't, let's say they write 100, whatever, it's not the same when you are the single author, the head of the lab, or the single postdoc who made, like the fantastic discovery, as opposed to one that is part of a team, right? So what I want to highlight here is the difficulties of science in terms of, like, what are we rewarding? We're rewarding the solo, like smart genius person, but in essence, we all know that there is no Nobel Prize without a team these days.
Right. Exactly.
So I mean, I'm sorry, but
No, I agree completely. Like, the project says adversarial collaboration, but really, like, all science should actually be that. That's really what it should be. It's sad that it's not, and that this has to be an idea that's introduced. And in fact, that seems so obvious that when someone says that, you're like, oh yeah, what have we been doing this whole time?
It's obvious, but then what I want to highlight is, like, when they go into the job market, because remember you were worrying about, like, you study consciousness, like, okay, these guys study consciousness, they end up in a paper, with many authors, right? So the level of disadvantage, in some sense, like the perceived disadvantage is great, right? So I think that we as a community need to understand that there's some people putting their careers on the line, so we need to back them up.
Yeah, totally. I agree.
And these are people like the ones sitting in the call, like the one, listening, so because at the end of the day, like in tenure and in jobs, application, etc., it's gonna be, like these people from this community, right?
Yeah,
you see what I mean? So I think that we need to really, embrace this and, do something, like stop the complaint and, let's take the action.
Yeah, I agree. I would just say that, this is a big problem, because I talk to graduate students and they're interested in consciousness, and it's like they ask, like, where should they go? And it's like, you almost sort of have to ask them, well, what theory do you like? And you shouldn't have to ask them that, right? If they want to study consciousness, you should be able to say, well, there's these 6 labs you could go, 20, whatever. But instead you have to be like, well, if you like global workspace, then you could check out these people who work on questions like that. Or if you like, and that just, it seems sort of like the wrong way to, so I agree completely with what you're saying. And I hope that the project succeeds. And I'm obviously, I don't know, if we're allowed to have doubts about it once we're involved, but I do. And so I'm glad that I'm able to talk with you about them. You guys have actually, it's having these kinds of conversations that's made me feel the way I feel, that I'm okay. And I think this is a good thing, and I see the benefits. So I want other people to hear this, because when they hear Templeton, people feel a certain way when they don't understand the project, so I think that these kinds of conversations, being open about it, with the limitations, the complexities, the challenges, all the things that we've talked about, I think is incredibly important. And that more people should have these kind of open discussions and be like, yeah, it's hard. We're trying the best we can. Like, what do you want us to do over, sort of like what you were saying earlier, Lucia? What would you do? Like, this is what we got. So I just want to thank you guys, that the people on the project, the courage they have, your guys' courage, all of that stuff, your openness to have these conversations, so good natured about it. I just think it's a great example for the field. So thank you.
And also the people in your project,
Oh, I agree. Yeah, we're wonderful too. We're not talking about us though, but
I know. But what I mean is, it takes all of these courageous people. You see, this is what I mean with the community.
Yeah.
So all of these people who are somehow embarked one way or another, right?
Yeah. I don't know for the younger generation is just nicer or what, but yeah, there is like a lot of nice people around.
Yeah. And let's do the utopia, and then we test your theory, like you put 3 subjects, I put, Liad put 4, and then we make it happen.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's wonderful. I'm really just, happy to be a small part of it, to be honest with you. So cool. In that sense, it's cool. But I see it is getting late. It's really late in some places where some people are. So having said that, I want to thank the 3 of you for coming on. I learned a lot from just thinking through these issues, just the conceptual and methodological issues. I'm super interested in taking it serious and trying to work through. So this has been so helpful. I learned a tremendous amount. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
And just hang out for a second.
Yeah,
thanks so much, Richard. This
cool.
was fun.
Just hang out for a second and I'll say bye off air, but I'll go ahead and do that.
Cool. See you.
All right, we're off.
Well, okay, we don't see any change, but